and welcome to episode 21 of the Make Things Better podcast. Today I'm joined by two colleagues of mine, Nick and Stuart Bennett. So thanks a lot for both coming on. Do you want to start by telling us what your job roles are at Hive IT?
Yeah, so I'm a senior software engineer. I've been working here for maybe like 6-ish years now. It's been pretty good, but get to work on lots of interesting stuff with Hive, and have a good time.
And I'm Stuart. I'm also a senior software engineer. I've been here only 3 years. Been working under Nick's wing, primarily on the front end side of things, with a lot of Next.js, which we're going to talk about today. So
yeah, absolutely. So that leads us into my first question for you both. How much experience do you have using Next.js so far then?
Quite a lot. Like now, maybe 5 projects at this point in time. Quite a few. For example, one of the big ones we use it on is for the Department of Education on the Explore Education Statistics platform. You use it for the front end there, makes everything super fast. It's great. We also use it on Western Park, which Stu's had quite a lot of hand in building.
I've been thrown in the deep end. I really enjoyed using it on there. I suppose most of my time with Hive, the whole 3 years, I've basically been working on Next.js. So enjoying it. Yeah,
so it'll be good to get into a bit more about Next.js today. And as you guys know, I have almost no clue about Next.js. So I'm sorry that some of my questions might not be the best. But anyway, my first question for you both is Vercel, because I know Vercel's built by the same people who built Next.js, right? But is Vercel the best way to deploy Next.js apps?
I think for most people it is, because it brings a lot to you out of the box, so you can just get started up and running. For new people, it's literally as easy as connecting up your GitHub account and clicking your repo, and then it just deploys it like magic, basically. Back in the old days, a lot of this would involve a lot more knowledge about how the deployment processes work and how building stuff and whatnot, and a lot of it's now just so much easier.
Short answer for me would be yes. You just link it up. I suppose there's a cost associated with that. I'm not sure if you could kind of reduce those costs if you did do it. Put your own stuff together to get your website out there. But I don't think you'd really make much of a saving, I suppose, by doing it that way. So I would say yes.
Yeah. So is saving the only real reason you wouldn't deploy via Vercel?
Well, so there's a few in my experience, there's been a few cases in the past where Vercel's been not the greatest. So for example, they have various limitations on how long things can run in the background. So if you have a request that takes too long, you can just kill your request and throw a nice ugly error screen for you instead. So there's stuff like that, which is not great. They've got limitations around stuff like environment variables and configuration, which can kind of, I'd say, almost be a project killer in some cases. So you need to be a little bit careful sometimes about that kind of stuff, which makes you basically end up creating workarounds, in which case you then really are forced to sometimes just jump off of Vercel onto other platforms. Thankfully, Next.js can be deployed on other platforms. So in a previous project, I used Google Cloud Run. This isn't very common use of it, but it worked pretty well, to be fair. So it's not impossible to deploy it to other platforms.
Yeah, Stuart, have you ever deployed it via a different platform?
No, I haven't. I've actually only used Vercel, and it's all been kind of really smooth. I haven't really run into I haven't really, I suppose, been in a situation where I would run into those limitations that Nick just mentioned. But so.
There's also another big one though. If your site becomes really popular, the pricing starts getting a bit crazy. Actually, right. So that's where kind of more aggressive caching is required, because if you got an Next.js site, it gets really popular. You've not really thought about the traffic and the implications of that on your bill. You might be surprised to come out with a $300 bill 1 month, got like up from like $50, like, or no, $20 like the previous month. It's like it can just do that, like, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, because I heard like Uber, Starbucks, Netflix, they're all using Next.js. So you think to deploy by yourself for those sites is costing a lot of money? Then?
Well, it might be, but for them it's like also nothing.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, costs are going to be so little. I guess it's just profits. Yeah,
it's going to depend on the scale of your project. So for like, we work a lot with like charities and non-profits. So like keeping costs down to minimum is usually a good thing. And I've worked with one non-profit where like the bills just were always above the base rate, and just like for months and months I was working like really hard to like bring those costs down, and having to like put like bits of caching everywhere to like try and like reduce the kind of overall expenditure essentially, which was a pain. I won't say it wasn't.
yeah And to improve how we use Next.js further, like what tips would you have for anyone who is using Next.js?
I suppose for me, I would say if you are picking up Next.js, or if you're relatively new to it, just to like learn about the different types of rendering that are available to you. I suppose in one way that can reduce like the load on the server to present pages to you and reduce costs that Nick just mentioned. So there's two main types, or possibly three, but I'd say two. The static rendering and the server-side rendering of the pages. I suppose that's why Next.js actually like really exists. It's like allowing React to kind of like be server-side rendered for you. Just making it easier. So look into that as early on if you're picking up Next.js. I think that'd be my tip. One
of the main improvements that Next.js have really brought was incremental static regeneration, which is like one of their, I'd say, killer features. Like we've used other frameworks for React rendering server side. So Gatsby is an example of what one our website, for example, is built with Gatsby. Yeah. But there's a bunch of disadvantages to rendering that way. So the whole incremental static regeneration, or ISR, means that you can just like have really quick build times. If a user comes to a page, only then does the page actually get cached, and that's like one of the main strategies for like actually deploying big Next.js apps, especially on Vercel as well. Like you don't want your build times being really long because there are also limitations on that. There's a bunch of things that you need to kind of consider in terms of caching and the time that things take. So having incremental the whole ISR feature is really useful.
Yeah. It's one of the main advantages to Next.js over the likes of Gatsby. Is it the pace side of things in terms of deploying?
So the what?
Like how fast it is to deploy?
I suppose, that's what the incremental server, static rendering is like. That's why I think, I'm not sure if Gatsby can do that. Do you know if Gatsby can
do that? Gatsby well, I mean,
I remember the Gatsby build times being quite long.
So we potentially have like 10 to 20 minute builds on the Hive website as it currently stands. But versus like a lot of our Next.js apps, we can build it in like less than 5 minutes, which is much faster. But the main difference would be that like I think with like Next.js anyway, it's just like you can also do a bunch of server side stuff that you can't do with Gatsby. So Gatsby, like it all has to happen at the build. Versus with Next.js, you could actually just have a page that does something completely different every time you visit it. Versus in like Gatsby, you just can't do that essentially. So there's quite a lot of advantages to using Next.js versus like Gatsby, for example.
Is there any reason you would use Gatsby instead of Next.js?
You probably wouldn't, but that might just be based on my like experience with Next and how comfortable I am with it now. So it would kind of be like, why would I go and something new? And also like looking at like the popularity of like the packages themselves and how much people are using them. Like Next.js is way more popular, so like that's a bit of a tell to say like that might be better. So for me, I would probably always go with Next.js. I'm quite like an advocate of it now. Like, any of my friends are like, "Oh, I want to learn some web development." I'm like, go learn React, go learn Next. This is all good stuff.
And talking about if your friends are like learning, React framework, would you say that Next.js is like the future of JavaScript frameworks?
I hope so.
It's like kind of a little bit with the JavaScript ecosystem is very what's the word, fickle. So things can lurch from one technology to another, like at the drop of a hat. Within like 2 years, everything that you thought you knew is just suddenly not applicable to this new thing that you have to learn, and that happens a lot. It's called churn, essentially. Yeah. So I'd say it's got a lot of legs though. Like this so far, it feels like it's been the best investment of time to learn for us as a company and us as developers in general, I think, compared to the other frameworks that we've mentioned, and also just like front end in general. Like JavaScript has mostly coalesced around React as like the main kind of like framework to use, library to use. The Next.js is like the framework for React, so it's almost like you've got the two power couple basically. But not to say there aren't any other competitors. Yeah. So there are potentially ones that have come up recently. So there's one called like Remix that I've like been keeping a bit of an eye on, but maybe at some point I'll give it a go and like see if it's a worthy competitor.
Yeah. And I know for some of our projects we've used Sanity as a headless CMS with Next.js as well. How have you found that experience?
I've really enjoyed using Sanity. So we use that on the Western Park website for Cancer Charity. And it's super lightweight to build and get it set up and running, primarily because like all of the data is stored elsewhere. It comes to us via an API, so it's literally just like start the CMS if you wanted to make changes in the CMS, or you could just literally start the front end, which would just interface to via the API. So if I wanted to get that project up and running with Next.js, it's just literally just like start and everything's ready to go. It's like there's no messing around. Not really anything can go wrong too drastically. So from that side of things, I'd be really happy working with Sanity, and the fact that it's all like in JavaScript as well also is like quite a big for me. That's a big plus.
Yeah, so developer experience is really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I think like one of the main pluses is like their studio is like gives you a lot of control. So sorry, like by studio I mean they have like a back end UI, how you typically expect in a CMS. So everything's actually defined with JavaScript and code. That as developers we have a lot of control over it compared to like other CMSs where like there's a lot of magic going on. You don't like you have to learn this really quite complicated system of like intricate like Rube Goldberg machine type kind of things going on, and like comparatively like you have quite a lot of control over like, oh, I want to make this part of the page look a certain way, I can like actually go and do that, versus if you're using other CMSs it's often like you just can't, like there's no way to go and do that essentially. So which is a big improvement, I'd say.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different like resources and ways to create different pages, is that right?
There's lots of different ways, but we've mostly coalesced around using kind of a block model.
Blocks or blocks within blocks to create like various different types of UIs that like based around like the data structure that we can put together within the CMS. So like you just can build like a staff profile and they'll like have their name, the role, and their like bio and stuff, and then we can easily like get that like data to the front end and then kind of present that how we want to.
The users can kind of pick and choose like what kind of bits of content they want on the page, basically. So staff blocks, or like a block that shows like a video or something, or like an image gallery. We can build all that kind of stuff as individual blocks, and the admins of of Sanity Studio can choose what they want and pick and choose and create a page however they want, which is, I think, works.
That's what well.
Yeah. They seem to be really getting it as well. They're making some really nice pages on Western Park.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, they picked it up really easily. I think they came from using WordPress, which I think they were kind of like they were ready for something new, ready to try something new. So Sanity for them, they'd be really happy with, I think. So.
Yeah, it sounds like it's working as well. I know I think the donations have increased quite a bit since we've been using Sanity as headless CMS on their site. So yeah,
I wouldn't say it's necessarily all attributed to Sanity. But
people's generosity instead, perhaps.
Fundraiser or two helps.
Well, yeah, some huge fundraisers. Yeah,
it did actually. Well, using like Next and everything did really allow them to take online donations and for them to be able to give that service to their own like customers and donors. So being able to like use Next.js and Sanity with that whole kind of like ecosystem just really made it easy for us to give them the tools that they need. That's been a big advantage.
How difficult do you think using and learning Next.js is as well?
If you know React quite well, it's actually fairly easy to transition into learning how to use Next.js. But if you're starting off from scratch learning React, you probably don't want to go straight to Next.js because you want to figure out how React works, how JavaScript even works if you're a real beginner. And then you want to move on to Next.js because there's a more complicated part of it, which is server-side rendering, which is very different to how you traditionally work with React, like in a really vanilla way. So you have to consider how essentially React renders stuff on a server versus how it works when it renders on a browser. And the browser is typically how a user views it. So those are two very different scenarios, but you have to consider both to actually get an optimum like kind of rendered page for the user, essentially. There's a bit more overhead, but I think for like a lot of projects, it's usually worth it to have like specific, particularly because it improves like page rendering quite a lot, like the speed of page rendering, so that like the user gets a page faster, they see have a faster user experience essentially. Which can.
So I agree with Nick. I think it's learn React first, and then Next is next. If you want to take it.
To the next level.
Wow. And so we've talked about quite a lot of positives to Next.js. Is there any downsides?
So I guess I've ran through a few of them, but like some of the caching can be a little bit fiddly. They've added new features recently so currently with how the caching kind of works, it was based on times. So like you'd have to say, this page will cache itself for like 2 minutes. So it would only stop caching 2 minutes later. But nowadays you can actually use an API to actually delete that cache essentially straight whenever you feel like it. So the main point of that is that you might want to cache a page for a very long time. So you might want to say, I want this page to be cached for days at a time, but only when someone updates some part of the page is the cache for the page is deleted. So then you can actually have like a really optimized site essentially. It's one of the strategies I've used to try and improve the kind of that project I mentioned earlier where the bills were quite high. Had to get a lot of caching in to kind of like bring those bills down. That was the strategy essentially.
So downside to me, I'm not sure. I feel like it's like the devil I know, and I'm quite happy with it. So it's like for me, I'm in terms of like Next.js versus Gatsby or other options, like I'm quite happy. So I don't see many downsides to using it. I'm just like Team Next.
Absolutely, in that camp. Okay, fantastic. So my final question for you both, Nick, I might have asked you this one before when we did a podcast a year or so ago, but Stu, this is obviously your debut on the podcast, so it's your first time answering this, but the question is, what can people do to make things better? And you can interpret this however you like.
So the first thought that came to my mind when you asked me that question, and I actually didn't know what that question was going to be, was just, I think like for me, it's like really help, if you're in a position where you can help people try and like take that step from academia into like employment, then you really should do that. And I feel like that's what I would like to be doing in my like next few years, especially. It's just like really help bring on like new developers into like this career path, that's what they want to do, or allow them to know if that is what they want to do, be able to inform them. and help them. So, and that's kind of like something that I went through as well in my early stage of my career. So I think that's me being able to give that back as well. So that's what I plan to do to make things better. And if people are in a position to do the same, then I hope that they choose to as well.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah. And you know?
For me, I'm gonna keep it I suppose, like quite prescient to what we've been talking about. So
use Next.js.
Well, no. My actual point is make websites fast. So my point about this is a lot of sites are slow. Slowness isn't great because you're basically causing more computation, more wasted processing power of people's computers. All of that's bad, and bad particularly from an environmental perspective. And this is quite relevant right now because this room is boiling. And climate change is like no joke, and really people need to pay more attention to climate change. So from our technical industry, we need to be paying a little bit more attention to the performance of our websites to like actually make them faster. There's only pluses to making things faster. So, and the climate very much is one aspect of it.
Yeah, that's a great answer and really relevant to this week because it's 40 degrees here in Sheffield yesterday. Like, what's going on?
It's ridiculous.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Loved having you both on. Where can people find you on social media or anything like that?
I'm on Twitter. I can't remember what my Twitter handle is. So
I'll edit something there. And you, Stu, anywhere to find you?
I'm not massively on social media. I do post on Instagram occasionally. I think it's stu.ben.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So, thanks a lot for watching or listening, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.